Good afternoon. Shaun Tabatt here from the Shaun Tabatt Show, coming to you for a special live broadcast for all of my friends who are now working at home for the very first time. I've had the pleasure of working at home multiple times throughout my career. I've actually been at home for like the last 2.5, 3-ish years, so it's something I'm very used to, but I know for a lot of you, this is brand new territory. So I thought I'd have a conversation with my friend David Amerland. He also has been working at home for quite some time, and so he's got some good thoughts on that. But I also want to jump into conversations about, like, what do we do? You know, culturally, we've entered a place none of us expected. We're kind of in this in-between space where there's all kinds of change that we know is coming. How do we find ways to thrive? How do we find ways to still grow in a positive direction rather than just being stuck and giving into fear? So those are some of the things I think we're going to cover today. Who knows? We might go in some other creative directions. But anyways, away we go. Let me bring in David. I've got him here on Skype with me. All right, David, my friend, good to see you.
Shaun, likewise. And what challenging times we live in.
I know. I mean, I was just thinking about that this morning and getting ready for this call. You and I talked back in January. Our outlook on 2020 was a lot different than I think it is today. And so one of the things I wanted to start our conversation off with is, how do we get out of this place of being stuck? You know, as I've been watching people on social media, you know, watching what I'm seeing in terms of happening in the retail space with buying, I feel like everybody's been kind of in shock. They're going out and maybe kind of panic buying, stocking up on food and things. And I get it. That makes sense. You want to make sure you're taking care of your family. But I don't see people doing much else other than just obsessively consuming any media they can find. They're just sitting on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and just watching. So I think the next step for a lot of us is to move past this stalled place where we're not making any progress. We're just in shock and kind of terror. So from your perspective, David, how do we start making progress? How do we get out of this shock and start moving forward?
Okay, what an excellent question. I think you also mentioned how quickly things have moved, which is key to the way we feel. We feel that way because we feel we haven't been prepared, either psychologically, mentally, or even physically. And we also get a sense that nobody else around us has prepared for this. And, you know, we're sort of used to thinking and looking towards points of authority, perhaps institutions like government, law or church, all those things around us which prop up society. And they also seem equally at a loss in what to do. And there's no guidance. So suddenly we feel, we are on our own. We need to do something in order to channel our anxiety. So we go out, we panic buy, as you said, we go home, and then we twiddle our thumbs and the anxiety mounts. Okay, here's what we need to understand, and this is how we work. This is how our brain works. It looks at the world around us. It tries to kind of threat assess or risk assess the threats that we see, and then it tries to work out some kind of strategy for survival. And usually that strategy for survival works through an external structure, which is created by the societal structures we have around us: work, friends, community, and so on. The moment we go home, we are isolated. We don't feel we have any of those things, and that's when panic sets in. And what we need to do now is actually put in a structure in place. And we do this by having a self-talk, a monologue, basically. What's important to us? What's the worst thing that can happen? We need to face that. Fear paralyzes us naturally until we actually come to understand what it is. So if it's the threat of death, for instance, which in some cases here it may be, if we acknowledge that as the worst possible scenario, then we can say, okay, this is the worst thing that can happen. What are the steps that can lead up to it? And if we identify those steps, then we can take precautions or actions to mitigate the circumstances that lead up to them. And that is real action, that is real agency. We're taking control of our own situation, which begins to calm us down a little bit, and we're taking control of our own circumstances, which gives us a sense of controlling the environment we live in. And these are the ways that we can actually begin to function on our own.
Well, and I want to get back to, more of how we can thrive, how we can grow, how we can make positive momentum in the midst of kind of the chaos and the crazy. But first, I want to talk about working at home. And so, I've been at home multiple times throughout my career. In this most recent stint, I think I'm getting close to 3 years that I've been working from home. And I know you've worked at home and worked remotely a ton as well. And I think one of the things you said a little bit ago is what a lot of people are experiencing, where they've kind of lost their moorings, their boundaries, kind of the normal kind of points that give them structure for their day. That's all gone. And so they don't quite know what to do. And I think the reality is when you're working from home, you need to create that structure. You need to, have kind of a routine and a space where you're working and all the things that you have on a normal work day. And so I'd love to hear, from your perspective, David, what are some things you put in place to be successful as somebody who's worked at home for a long time?
Well, and I'm going to be very prescriptive here, using a formula which works in a very broad kind of range of abilities and job types for working from home. Okay, the first thing you got to do when you start your day, get physical, do something physical, go for a walk, do some push-ups, do some kind of exercise. Make that the initial point of your day. And the reason you need to do that is because, first of all, it's going to be hard. The tendency is to do nothing. Grab a cup of coffee, catch up with the news, watch TV, look through your email, and then think about starting your day. Well, don't do that. Do something physical. The moment you do something physical, it takes you out of your comfort zone. It gets your brain oxygenated, it gets your bloodstream oxygenated, your decision-making improves, and at the same time, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. If you start your day like that, there's nothing else that you can't cope with. There's absolutely, very positive step towards that. Now, once you've done that, grab a shower, grab some coffee, breakfast, and so on, and then think about your next goal. So make something specific which you need to achieve. Go out in your work now, go to your desk or wherever you are in your workstation, and actually achieve that. Focus on that. Don't get distracted by Netflix. don't look at emails. Don't take the dog for a walk. Don't do any shopping. Don't do any of those things. And make that your next step, and then make the next step. Usually what I try to do within any given day is achieve 3 specific things. Anything else around them is a bonus. And that gives very concrete structure to my day and allows me to feel that whatever happened, I'm actually moving things forward. And it's a good formula to have in mind.
David, what are your ideas in terms of an ideal work environment? I know for people who are in makeshift situations, they might not be setting up a permanent office in their house, but I can say for me, I've got this space I'm in right now. This is my dedicated space for work. All I do in here is I work, I create. This is my space for that and that alone. Otherwise, I'm not in here for anything but that. It's fairly distraction free, which is a good thing for me. Other than mountains of books, because I work in the publishing space, there's not a whole lot to distract me except maybe Facebook or Instagram. But in terms of creating that ideal environment, especially assuming people are maybe setting up makeshift temporary spaces in their homes, what are some things to watch out for or be conscious of in creating a space where you can maximize the amount of work you can accomplish?
Well, I think what you just said about being distraction-free, or as distraction-free as possible, that's actually the best advice you can give. Sure, if you're working from home long-term, having a special place for you is ideal because you can go there, your workday starts, and then you can finish, and your work stays there. But this is an unusual situation. A lot of us have to basically make do with what is available. So really, don't try to get too comfortable. Don't go and sort of lie down on your sofa thinking you're going to work from your laptop there. It will not happen. Don't go somewhere where you can look out the window and see what's going on outside or what isn't going on outside. Don't go anywhere where you might be distracted by perhaps TV playing in the background or anything like that. So focus, find a corner which will allow you for a while to just go into your own space and make that your workspace. And that's the best advice you can possibly sort of use.
And one of the big challenges, I think, in terms of working at home is to always feel like you're working, never being able to shut it off. So at the end of the workday, when we need to focus on just the other priorities of running our household, family, significant others, how do we shut it off at the end of the day and make sure our focus is elsewhere and not being tempted to work 24/7? Because that's very easy to do that if we don't set some boundaries in place.
Absolutely. And I think This is where the work-life balance thing comes into play. Well, we need to realize that although our brain, doesn't physically lift anything, it works very much like a muscle. It gets tired, and the moment it gets tired, it begins to make mistakes. We begin to lose motivation. Then, when, the destructive self-monologue comes in, which tells us we're not worth anything, we're making do, and we can't get to where we want to, and so on and so on. So it's really important to avoid that. That's why I mentioned earlier, set yourself 3 tasks. Every time you accomplish a task, take a break. Go and make yourself a cup of coffee. Go out on the balcony if you live in a block of flats. Walk out in the garden. Just change scenery and let your mind unwind a little bit. And this is the equivalent of the water cooler thing at work, where we just walk to the water cooler, we just chat with somebody for about 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. We go back to our workstation and we actually feel refreshed. And that's a structured way at work of breaking the tempo. We need to do the same thing at home. So we do that. And then we go back to work, do something else, and then repeat the process. At the end of the day, it's really important to just shut down and do something different. Watch TV, play a video game, talk to friends, over the phone probably, or Skype in this case, or FaceTime. And just take yourself somewhere else where you don't actually have to consciously think about work, so that you can feel that you've moved out of that mental space.
And now we're going to get to the question I was most excited to talk to you about. David, of all of my author friends, is the one I want to talk to in terms of personal development, self-improvement, learning how to up my game and get better. If I have questions related to that, he is the guy I want to talk to. And we've reached this unprecedented space culturally and globally, really, where we've all stepped into what I would call a liminal space. We're at this in-between space where we've all entered into this pandemic. We don't quite know when it's going to end. We don't quite see what's on the other side. And when we're in what you might call a liminal space, this is where we can encounter change. We can be forged. We can move. We can be affected in some way. Now, if we choose to panic and be stalled and just kind of sit and wait for things to happen to us, I think what we're going to end up with on the other side of it, probably not quite as positive. But we can also be proactive and choose to find ways to thrive and grow and really be propelled forward in a positive momentum in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of this liminal space. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, maybe what are you doing to thrive in the midst of this liminal space? And for people that want to be sure they're being intentional about growing, even in the midst of what is a scary time, what might that look like? What would you recommend?
What a great question. Without a doubt, we're all feeling some fear, some anxiety, and a whole lot of uncertainty. That's a given. We all feel that, regardless of where we are in the world, regardless of who we are. So it's important to actually pull together, even though we are apart. Thankfully, we have the technology to do that, and we have the means to connect with other people. And I would urge most of our listeners right now, of our viewers, to actually do the same thing. And you asked me what I do. I produce a lot of content every day as part of my normal workload. And I've had to think very hard about the next step as the coronavirus struck across the world. So essentially what I do these days is I produce content intended to help people who have started working from home, who feel isolated, who feel cut off, who feel uncertain. And it's intended to help them as much as possible. And I'm really aware of the divide here where, perhaps, you create content in terms of branding and reach and audience experience and expansion. And I don't do that consciously. I say, this is not about branding. This is not about reaching an audience right now. It's about reaching you, whoever you might be, as a person, from me as a person. And that human connection really helps us because we all need to feel that human touch. It calms us down a little bit. It elevates us because it connects people differently. And it allows us to experience greater value in that connection, almost like a community. And that's our superpower, essentially. We have the ability in times of crisis to pull together and actually, learn to do incredible things. And when it comes to your own personal development, since you're at home, I would suggest you do something which you hadn't had time to do before. Perhaps read a book, even watch a film, and actually think about it. And, that will give you headspace, which will create perspective, and perspective is what we all need.
Well, I think there can be a tendency on the one hand to, double down, work harder, and try to ignore everything that's going on, or we can choose to slow down, maybe feel and experience together with our friends and family all that's going on around us. But I think what you said about slowing down, reading a book, if you are working on a manuscript for a book, maybe actually set aside some more time to actually finish writing that manuscript or get a good chunk of writing accomplished. Or if there's something new that you want to learn, there are tons and tons of companies that are making all of their e-content free right now across the globe for just about anything you could want to learn. And so find a way to for lack of a better way to say, to better yourself. I think if you find things to accomplish, to achieve, you will come out on the other side of those milestones feeling like there is a bit more boundary and structure around your day to day and what's going on. And you won't have just sat in a place of kind of fear and being stuck. You'll actually make some kind of forward momentum. And I feel like if we're able to have some sense of normalcy and make progress in small areas of our life, that's going to spill over into helping us to keep moving forward in the other areas of our life as well. So, I always say success begets more success. I think progress in any area will beget more progress in other areas of our life.
Definitely. In our head, everything is connected, even though we don't realize. And because we don't have sort of a multiplicity of neural circuits which allow us to be different in our off-work life, in our work life, in our private life, in our public life, and so on. So essentially, the more we train our minds to flow in a structured way, to channel the anxiety into actions and decisions which are positive, the greater the experience we're going to have in terms of how it affects us at a personal level, and also how we affect other people around us. It is panic. Panic is very easy to spread. It's actually contagious, and there are studies around that. But so is kindness, and so is calmness. And the more we project this calmness and kindness to others, the more we're going to get back from them.
Well, David, you have a fantastic book that I think a lot of the listeners, the viewers, would benefit from. We actually talked about this book, goodness, maybe 2 years ago, and that's your book, The Sniper Mind. Tell us a little bit about that. If people read that book, what sorts of things might they learn and encounter?
It's actually quite topical because it's about dealing with uncertainty and making better decisions. And it allows us to be a little bit more introspective using neuroscience and the skills that basketball players and baseball players and snipers use to make critical decisions under tremendous pressure and in very high sort of very intense situations. So we can actually learn a lot about this by applying those same techniques to our own selves, to our own situations, to the way we think, to the way we choose to actually approach a particular scenario and the perspective we apply to that. And if we borrow those techniques, what we will find is that our decision making becomes more accurate, it becomes surer, but more importantly, we learn who we are. We learn how to apply the skills we have in a surer way. We learn how to define our purpose, and within that, how to find our own self.
Well, in terms of learning, bettering ourselves, furthering ourselves for our career and success, I know you have another book that might be interesting to some of my friends that are in the kind of the marketing and business space. You have a new SEO book that just came out. I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
That's right, yes. SEO, search engine optimization, has been changing. I mean, it changes pretty much every day a little bit, and throughout the year. By the end of the year, it's almost completely different to what it was at the beginning of the year. Having said that, throughout the last 15, 20 years that we've actually had this kind of industry, the aim of search engine optimization, the aim of search itself has been the same. It's been to surface the best possible answer to a query at the right time and to the right person. And the magic happens when this works properly. Essentially, the skills we have now to apply these things in a marketing perspective allows search to understand what we do online a little bit better, to understand what our company is about, who does what and when and where, in order to answer those search queries that end users put in a search engine device, whether it's a desktop computer or a phone or a tablet these days.
Well, David, I always appreciate having any opportunity to catch up with you. For the listeners, the viewers who'd like to connect with you, find out more about your work, find out more about your books, where are some of the places we can encounter you on the web?
You can find me on Twitter at David Amerland. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me at my own website, davidamerland.com.
And like we do with every episode, I'll have some detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with David and pick up your own copies of his amazing books. This wasn't quite meant to be an episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, but I'm going to use it for a podcast episode anyways. So if you want to find out more about David and our previous interviews, I'll have that all linked up in the show notes. Once again, you can find that over at shauntabatt.com. And David, my friend, I just want to say thanks for sharing with us, helping us to glean from your wisdom and know how to move forward in these turbulent and unsure times. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, my friend.
Likewise here. Stay safe.